One of the myths of American individualism begins with the idea that people can be defined with a list of traits. Some people are strong, some are smart, some are kind, and so forth, and other people aren't. Of course, these traits are real qualities around which we can have meaningful conversations, but for the most part, traits like these are only distinctive when they are made concrete via comparison to someone or something else. For example, if I say, Amy is strong, that doesn't mean very much until I answer the question, how strong? Is she strong enough to open a pickle jar? Strong enough to kill a minotaur? Stronger than Lynn? In each of these, Amy's strength is not an objective measure. It's a measure in comparison to something or someone else. Knowing this, if an inexperienced writer sat down to write a story about Amy and they wanted to communicate that Amy is a strong female protagonist, they might begin with something like this. Amy was hungry. She found a jar of pickles in the fridge. She opened it. Well, hold on, that didn't really feel like it told us as much as we were hoping. Maybe it just needs more convincing details. Amy found a jar of pickles in the fridge. Flexing her impressive musculature, she cracked open the jar with a loud pop. There we go. We did it. We've written a strong female protagonist. Our protagonist is so strong, she could open a pickle jar. After all, easily opening a pickle jar is what a strong character would do, right? In fact, let's fill the whole story with examples of Amy easily doing things that require similar feats of strength. She never fails because only weak characters would fail at those kinds of strength-based tasks. This is going to be such a compelling story, right? I think you can already tell it won't be. Once you've read this pickle story back to yourself, you might start to notice some dissatisfaction with it. One of the first impulses of an inexperienced writer might be to question whether the feats of strength are really impressive enough. Pickle jars aren't really that hard to open, after all. In fact, most people, or let's say the average person, can open a pickle jar. We wouldn't keep packaging them like this if they couldn't. So maybe we've set the bar too low. Maybe to be more convincing that Amy is the strong protagonist we promised, we should try to raise the stakes a bit. What if we show that Amy is a strong character by having her kill a minotaur? Amy was a real hero and a champion swordswoman. When a vicious minotaur attacked her village, she took up her weapon and fought with courage and valor and rippling biceps until the beast was slain. Okay, now she's strong. Killing a minotaur is way harder than opening a jar of pickles, so we must have convinced the audience that she's compellingly strong now, right? First of all, I do want to acknowledge that we have improved the audience's sense of Amy's strength to an extent. If Amy flips a car with one hand in the next scene, we are getting meaningful measurements of her objective level of physical strength, measurements that we will carry with us through the rest of the story and use as touch points for understanding how Amy is able to force open a door or slay a dragon in later scenes. The problem, though, is that our protagonist doesn't actually need to be capable of slaying a dragon or flipping a car or killing a minotaur in order to be a convincingly strong character. The jar of pickles could have been enough. I'll get back to explaining how in a minute, but first, let's get back to our inexperienced writer. They don't want to make Amy slay a minotaur in order to prove she's strong. Minotaurs don't really fit in this story, so let's see if we can be more convincing with a different kind of comparison. Instead of changing what Amy is strong enough to do, let's add a character so that Amy has someone we can compare her to. Amy and Lynn were hungry. Lynn found a jar of pickles in the fridge. Lynn tried opening the jar of pickles, but she couldn't. She huffed and she puffed. She wrapped her whole arm around the pickle jar lid. She strained until her face got sweaty and red, but still she couldn't do it. Please, oh great and powerful Amy, help me open this jar of pickles so we can eat, Lynn begged. Amy took the jar from her and popped it open with a single, powerful twist. Okay, this is better than the original too. Amy is definitely strong because she's way stronger than Lynn, but now we've created a different kind of problem. In this kind of scene, Amy is only capable of being strong if Lynn is weak. The moment Lynn stops being weak, Amy isn't strong anymore. They're both just average. This is the problem with individualism, too. In order to convincingly prove to ourselves that we are strong, to prove that we are at the top of the bell curve, we have to make sure we can find others who are weaker in comparison. And in order to believe ourselves loved, we must find others who are hated. In order to believe ourselves worthy, there must be others who are unworthy. Every character in the world must exist on a hierarchy that requires a bottom so that it is possible to tell who is on the top. And thinking that way can motivate us as writers to create a world that forces less important side characters into that role, or less important people beneath us. Without a weak Lynn, Amy is back to being someone who can just do the mildly impressive and not very interesting task of opening a pickle jar. But honestly, a story that requires this weak Lynn character doesn't feel that interesting either. And partially I think that's because setting the story up this way does a disservice to both characters. Let's put both of them into the Minotaur scene to make this more obvious. And remember, Amy is supposed to be our protagonist here. Amy and Lynn were champions of the village. Amy was a champion swordswoman. Lynn was an elite archer. When the vicious Minotaur attacked, they stood together, at least for a while. Whenever the Minotaur stamped its huge feet, the ground shook. Lynn was always losing her footing, but Amy stood strong. In the end, it was she who slew the dreadful beast. Once again, we've proved that Amy is strong, relative to Lynn. But if we need someone like Lynn to prove that Amy is strong in every scene, then we're going to end up populating the world with really weak characters, sometimes incompetently weak ones, when we could be populating it entirely with very interesting, active, complex ones. The very best stories are great at doing the latter. Think of a show like Arcane. By some measure or another, every character in Arcane is strong. There are no blundering weaklings, no damsels in distress. Every character is rich, distinct, active, powerful, and has a totally different relationship to the entire concept of strength. Or maybe think of something like Princess Mononoke. Every character in that story is some kind of strong too, even when they are weak in direct comparison to another character. It would have been easy to portray the lepers and the Irontown women as powerless victims, to bolster our sense of Lady Eboshi's strength by comparison. But the story doesn't do that. Instead, both the lepers and the Irontown women are powerful, competent, dangerous characters. And somehow, Lady Eboshi's strength isn't diminished or made merely average by comparison. I think that's because neither of these stories set out to write strong characters in the first place. They set out to write human ones. If we stop thinking of characters as a list of personality traits, stop thinking of them as being either strong or not strong, kind or not kind, then we can instead allow them to be everything. Everything that humans are capable of being. Everyone is strong. Everyone is kind. Everyone is intelligent. And everyone is also weak, mean, and stupid sometimes, too. Individual characters just possess those traits in different ways and for different reasons and in different contexts. The point of the story is no longer to prove that Amy is strong, because in this worldview, of course she is. Everyone is. The point of the story is to look at the unique relationship that Amy has to strength, and how that relationship pushes her to make decisions that are different from other people's. Let's pull that pickle jar back out for some examples. Amy's son walked into the kitchen. "Mom, I'm hungry," he said. Amy opened the fridge. All they had left was a jar of pickles. Trying to keep her face calm so her son would not see her worry, Amy pulled out the jar. It was hard to open this time. She was feeling weak these days because she was eating less to make sure her son had enough. But she got it open and fished one out for him with a fork. As he took it back to the table to eat, her stoicism melted into tears. In this version of the story, we don't need to prove that Amy is strong, and therefore opening the jar of pickles doesn't need to be easy. Neither does keeping a straight face. We can already tell that this is a story about a woman who is being strong, but it's interesting, it's compelling, Because what we're really doing is telling a story about that woman's relationship to strength. In this version, Amy feels like she has to be strong to protect someone she loves. Already, we are wondering things like, how long can she keep this up? We're expecting her to fail sometimes, and when she does, signs of weakness will both, 1, not feel out of character, and 2, not diminish the ways in which she is also still strong. Let's look at another example. Amy was a champion swordsman and the hero of her town, but recently she had suffered a devastating injury. At lunch with her friend Lynn, the castle cook had included a jar of pickles for Amy, still sealed tight. "Can you help me with this?" Amy asked, handing the jar to Lynn. "Is your arm bothering you?" Lynn asked, opening the jar of pickles. Amy nodded. "I don't want to push myself at all today. I'm saving my strength for when that Minotaur arrives." In this version, we once again don't need to prove that Amy is strong, and therefore Lynn doesn't need to be weak. Amy doesn't need to be stronger than Lynn. She doesn't even need to match Lynn. We can tell that she is a fundamentally strong character because her relationship to her own strength says so. This version of Amy seems to believe that strength is a resource, and if managed well, then she will have it when she needs it. Maybe this story is going to be about the tactics she uses to increase her day-to-day strength, and how she is forced to try new strategies when circumstances are out of her control. That's a lot more interesting than a story about someone who is always the strongest character in the room. You can do this with all kinds of character traits if you push yourself to be curious. Don't write a story about someone who is queen. Write a story about someone's relationship to queenliness. Skip writing a character who is brave. Write a story about that character's relationship to bravery. And don't write about someone who has a disability. Write about someone's relationship to their disability. Heck, write a whole cast of characters who have completely different relationships to their inabilities and see what happens when you throw something challenging at them. I promise the results will be more interesting and more compelling than the alternative, and that the traits you were trying to bring out in the first place will seem more human and more alive.